hello and welcome here from Berlin, from the ICNC. Next to me is someone not from Berlin, Dustin Schell. You are the Air Resource Engineer for the California Energy Commission, or CEC, the main agency in charge of setting up charging infrastructure in California.
Correct.
Now, California really is a pioneer when it comes to electric vehicles, electric charging infrastructure, at least in the US. A lot of policies that other states take over. But have these policies really paid off in recent years?
Yeah, I'd say we're seeing a substantial increase. Very recently, we revised our charger counts in the state. We're at 150,000 chargers. EV sales through Q2 of 2025, or 2024, were 25%. And we're projecting a need for another, well, I guess we're at 150,000, so another 850,000 chargers, around 1 million by 2030. So I think we're definitely moving in the right direction.
Okay, so at the CEC, you obviously look at charging infrastructure in the state of California. And there are two, if I can say this from, I don't know how many thousand miles away, two things that really look difficult for your state are availability and reliability. Let's start with availability. So you have, in the south, you have big cities, LA, San Diego. In the north, you have big cities, speaking about San Francisco. And then in the middle, there's a whole lot of nothing. So how do you go about tackling these two issues? Let's start, like I said, with availability. How do you make EV charging infrastructure available across the state so everybody can drive an EV?
Yeah, so if we're talking about availability strictly in the context of are there chargers there, we have a lot of programs where we funded specifically charging in rural areas throughout California. We also have low-income and disadvantaged community-focused funding programs and funding programs focused at multi-unit housing. And a lot of those do get targeted into the Central Valley and all of those other areas that are not the Bay Area and Southern California. So we are very focused on that. And I would say also that the NEVI program was very good for that as well, because theirs was focused on building out a system of chargers on highways throughout the state. So,
NEVI program, National EV Infrastructure Program. I always have to say, I always have to spell it out once at least.
Yeah, sorry, we talk about it a lot in the states. It's a federal funding program to build out the electric vehicle charging network throughout the entire U.S.
So before we talk about reliability, and then let's talk about that funding. How much funding does the U.S. have, and how much funding does California have to actually build up these 1 million chargers by 2030? Because let's say 2030, that's tomorrow.
It's looming, yeah. So I won't speak on federal funding amounts. That's kind of outside of my scope. I think it's right around $7.5 billion, but again, that's sort of out of my scope. In California, we're projecting currently to invest $1.5 billion through California programs only, and that projection is through fiscal year 27-28. In addition to that, we have $160 million from the NEVI program, and then another federal grant for about $100 million. So put all that together, and we're getting close to $1.75 billion. Kind of 2028 timeline that will be available for EV charging in California alone.
So one of the big issues in Europe is always grid connection. How is that in California? Is that a big issue as well? You have the room, it is said it's a whole lot of nothing in some parts of California. You would have space to set up EV chargers, but can you get a grid connection?
Yeah, grid connections are definitely challenging. It's always challenging. A little outside of my scope again, so I'm going to demur on that one a little bit. But it's definitely something that we've passed programs to accelerate the permitting process for funding for grid connections, and we're looking at other ways to accelerate it as well.
Okay, well then let's stick with your scope. Regulations. What kind of regulations is California setting up and really working on to ensure the setup of EV infrastructure in the coming years?
Sure. So right now we have a few different regulations that are in varying stages of the process. The big one is our reliability regulation, which requires, it has a lot of requirements. It's hard for me to kind of distill in this conversation, but in simplest terms, it requires chargers funded through the state of California to meet successful charge attempt rates and it requires them to meet uptime percentage rates. And it requires a lot of reporting and automatic data transmission built on OCPP. And that's part of the effort to standardize everything and set a level playing field to evaluate everybody on when it comes to reliability.
So that looks great on paper, but is that additional hoops for companies to jump through to set up charging infrastructure? Does that also mean additional hurdles?
Yes and no. I mean, definitely OCPP. Not everybody has an implementation of OCPP, so that could potentially set up a barrier. But there are two different that I'm aware of open source platforms for OCPP. So new players entering the market should be able to easily fold those in. Beyond that, the reporting, we've reduced the retention time for the chargers that will be automatically transmitting data, and from there, it's just an API and batch push your OCPP logs to us. So we think it won't be too big of a hurdle. Yes, it's always going to be an added thing, but in my mind, that's better than having a bunch of bricked chargers on the side of the road that the taxpayers of California funded.
Okay, so you pretty much answered all my questions about reliability, so we don't need to touch on that. But I said in the beginning that California is kind of a pioneer in terms of EV infrastructure or EV driving and in large terms.
Mm-hmm.
Germany kind of sees itself as a pioneer as well.
Great.
Is there, yeah, it's great. Is there something that you take away from, say, this conference, or that you look to from Germany and say, okay, that's something that we can implement in our state as well?
I can say that I've definitely seen Germany doing a lot of the same things that we're doing, and you guys were probably a few steps ahead of us. I've interfaced some with the German government. You'll have to forgive me, I don't remember the specific department within the German government, but some of the staff there who are looking at reliability, who are looking at station availability, and they're looking at a lot of the same metrics that we are. I'm sure you know there was just recently the German government published a paper about successful charge attempts, and that group is a group of people that I've spoken with a few times already. I don't want to call them out by name or anything like that, but yeah, I think it's refreshing for me to see that the German approach seems to mirror our approach, and maybe you guys are just a few months ahead of us. So,
okay, let's just hope we're not all going down the wrong route together. Last question in terms of high power charging, because we talked about availability, and you talked about housing and making charging available at housing and so on. But what about high power charging? I mean, that's something that the whole of the US, let's say, is also lagging a little bit behind. Is that something that you're looking at, that you're pushing specifically, or is that just kind of, okay, well, that will come as we push everything, as we roll out?
I think we've seen the market go towards fast charging on its own. We actually were very surprised by the numbers of fast chargers that are available in California right now. They're well ahead of where we had projected they would be, and we ended up revising down some of our level 2 or low power charger needs based on the total number of DC fast chargers that were out there. So within California, at least, I don't necessarily see a lack there. We definitely need more. We're starting to run into some congestion issues in some of the bigger urban areas, but we're well ahead of where we thought we would be. So.
All right, Dustin, we're at the end of the walkway. So our interview, unfortunately, is also at the end. Thank you very much for giving us some insight into the California charging scene. And let's hope that you have some inspiration that you maybe can take back home.
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate the time.